Now, I have described in another place at great length the way promotions are made, and one of my colleagues on this side yesterday appeared either to have read with statement or in another way has placed before the house, not on behalf of the government, much of the material that I would have dealt with. But here, what I want to point out is that these selections are done by well established procedures which have been there for many years and have not been altered. In regard to the bulk of the officers, there are complaints from some quarters that perhaps government ought to look more into it. That is to say, it is not a question of too much interference but of too little interference with regard to the local lower levels. But since that point has not been raised, I do not want to raise this problem myself. But with regard to the higher ranks of the army, it is done by number one selection board, as was pointed out, from colonels up to major generals, where 9 officers sit, that is the chief of the army staff, his deputy, 3 army commanders and 4 principal staff officers. They mark these people separately on separate papers and discuss them, and in the net result of that discussion the differences are ignored out. Besides examination of their records, the personal knowledge of these officers by their present or previous commanders who would be sitting around the table would be taken into account. Then it comes to the government, and the government, that is the defense ministry, examines them so far as they can from the papers, that is to say whether the conclusions are warranted by the premises supplied by the books, and then it is put up before the minister after discussion in the ministry itself as to the pros and cons of this matter. Normally the recommendations that come from the army headquarters are accepted, and neither in the case that is now spoken about nor in anything else have these recommendations been turned down. Although I know that observation, I would like to make it clear on behalf of the government that the government have the right to turn down these recommendations because the services are under civilian control. It would be bad day when the government responsible to parliament cannot have the last word in this matter. Because it is not merely a question of a soldier being efficient, there may be other matters to be taken into consideration. I am happy to think that no personalities have been introduced, because if the minister were to pursue the same line as those of the critics and drag the officer in, it would not be in his interest. When we go round to the question of seniorities and supersessions, I would like to say that so far as the lower levels are concerned, that is to say up to the rank of lieutenant colonel, the proportions of selections have remained much the same. There is a variation of 2 or 3% each year over the last 5 or 6 years, but it is more or less a mechanical process. When we come to the selection of lieutenant generals in the Indian Army, it is done not by the selection boards. This is done on the recommendation of the chief of the army staff. The Prime Minister offered in the other house on a previous occasion for them to come and see the papers, rather unusual, but he, has the head of the government, is free to do so. While the other was open, no one turned up. One person asked to come and we arranged it, but nothing happened. In any case, a lieutenant general is appointed by government on the recommendation of the chief of the army staff. The same process goes through, because while there is no selection board, the chief of the army staff by convention consults the army commanders, which is a sort of selection board of a smaller type. That recommendation comes before us, and within the available people, those who have the minimum qualification come first. Those who have good record, particularly outstanding qualities. I would like again to say that we are playing upon words. There is no supersession, they are selection appointments. If you take the British Army today, the chief of the Imperial General Staff is a person who has been superseded twice before, but he comes up again. In my experience, there has been no appointment to these offices which has not been recommended in this way, and it is the good fortune of the government that they have been able to accept it. There has been some disturbance with regard to the recent appointment of army commanders by convention. have been appointed by government even without reference to the chief of staff by selection of 2 or 3 people, but in this case discussions and consultations have taken place, and I am quite free to say that there is nothing in this appointment which merits criticism. Sir, I do not look upon our plan as an over-ambitious one. One has to remember while considering it that our population is increasing faster than our means of production. We have to meet the challenge of this growing population. Undoubtedly, birth control is important, but it is not easy to carry out propaganda for birth control in a population of illiterate people and superstition-ridden people. Then, sir, unless we plan wholly, we shall not be able to provide employment for our people. We have to bear in mind that it is essential to provide employment for our increasing population. Even with the plan carried out, the unemployment figure will stand high, and the question to be considered is whether more attention should not be placed upon our small scale and medium sized industries. Is it not possible for us to ensure that all sections of the population get the benefit of the plan? After 2 successful plans, a few industrialists, despite our heavy taxation, own nearly 75% of the total capital of our public companies. Banking facilities for the common man are few, and even banks favor large business houses because they have more guarantees to give them the small people. We have a large landless population and large numbers depend upon it for support. What we need therefore to plan successfully is greater cohesion, greater emotional integration, and greater national unity among ourselves. We are wasting time over quarrels that do not touch the common man. Both the government and the opposition parties have responsibilities towards the mass of our people. Is it not possible for all of us, regardless to party labels, to cooperate fully in all those tasks that make for the welfare of the common man? Can we not forget petty party, sectional, communal and group differences? Is it not possible for us to have a national as opposed to a mere party outlook towards the problems raised by the plan? Sir, the general elections are coming. It should not divert our attention from the main task of finding solutions on a national basis to the problems of unemployment, health and education. There are the things that our people mostly need, and to them we must devote our full attention. The second thing that I would like to emphasize is that though our national income has increased by 42%, we do not exactly know how it has been distributed. It is not enough to say that the per capita income has increased. The right question that has to be answered by us is whether it has increased in terms of real income. For that, we have to see whether the price level has kept pace with the wage level. It is now no satisfaction to a man that his nominal income has gone up, though at the same time the price level has reduced. His purchasing power, not only for luxury articles but for articles of common consumption. Concessions have been made to industrialists. Perhaps it was inevitable that they should be made. We had to provide incentives for capital formation, but the budget, even after the reliefs given, which I gratefully acknowledge, will, I apprehend, increase the burden of the common man. The middle classes are the backbone of any community. There is dissatisfaction amongst them because of the raising prices. It is essential that in a mixed economy such as ours, the state should evolve a machinery of adequate price control. Prices should not be allowed to go beyond a certain level, and there must be a ceaseless war against hoarders and profiteers. They are pests of society and should be looked upon as such. Equality of sacrifice demands that those who have more should be made to pay more than those who have less. The marginal utility of money is greater with people of less income than with big incomes. The third point that I would like to point out is that concentration of economic power should be discouraged. One of our articles provides that the ownership and material resources of the country should be so distributed as to subserve the common good. Another article provides that there should be suitable legislation for a living wage, fair conditions of work, decent standard of life, social and cultural activities, and full enjoyment and leisure, as also for the promotion of cottage industries on an individual and cooperative basis in rural areas. The progress of the plan has to be tested in the light of these objectives. Small and medium-sized concerns should be encouraged so that concentration of wealth may break up. We would like to have the results of the inquiry as to how the national dividend has been distributed early. We should know who are the classes who have benefited most by our plans. Are they the people with big capital? The spirit of the constitution is against the concentration of wealth in single hands, and this should be borne in mind by us. Full stop. Over.